The merge is really cool. The fact that we had everyone kind of like working together and being ready for this fork of the chain. It was hectic, but it was like so cool just to see it all kind of happen together, having the whole community come together and pay attention to what, the core devs were doing and what they were saying. It was so, so cool. And I was like super stoked to be a part of that. We went from about 20 validators, which was a proof of authority consensus, to now 111,000 validators, which is very diverse when it comes to chain. Martin has a little screenshot there on his Twitter showing that, Ethereum has 440,000 validators. Gnosis Chain has 106 at that time. And then the next one down is Cardano. And then, of course, the first one is Bitcoin, but, we're only talking about MEV chains, right?
Right, and I know that this was sort of a real milestone as far as this year goes and as far as Gnosis Chain as an ecosystem goes. There is a very concerted effort within Gnosis Chain to build out the validator community.
It's a super low barrier, meaning that, you do need the hardware, but a lot of people have crappy laptops that kind of work these days, and you can run a validator on there. You don't have to essentially buy the Intel NUC that DAppNode provides, although they make it a lot easier if you do that. Essentially, you have one GNO that allows you to spin up one validator, and you essentially become part of the network and you start earning yield and you can start processing transactions. Nethermind has made it fairly easy. They have this tool called Sedge. Essentially, it's like a one-click setup. So you just click and away you go. We're trying to make it super simple for people to spin up a node and spin up a validator. And of course, as shown on the screen, we have what's called the praise reward system. If you hop in on the Gnosis Chain Discord, and you go in the validator chat and you ask some questions, you're going to have a swarm of people that are trying to respond to you and talk to you, not only because they're trying to be part of the network, trying to help everyone out, but also we have what's called the praise reward system. Every time someone, you give them some praise, and in the end, you get rewarded with some GNO.
I would say I've dug into the newsletter myself, after looking at Sedge. It really helps to smooth out the UX for people who might be new to this type of thing. Christopher and Mitch, I guess earlier this year, and talk about the praise reward system and just a really novel way to incentivize validators. I don't know of a single blockchain that's really trying to foster the same level of decentralization at the validator level.
Yeah, totally. And of course, we have also like validator meetups. So you can actually talk to core devs. If you have questions about it, like every month we try to get like the Nethermind team or one of the core teams to come on Discord, and you can ask directly questions to the actual people building the software, setting a standard when it comes to building software.
Well, the last piece of the decentralization and neutrality we wanted to touch on here really has to do with, I guess, a certain level of progressive, decentralization that has specifically to do with Gnosis DAO and some of its most successful products spinning off into their own decentralized organizations. If you're following along in the slides here, of course, you'll see these are projects that through the governance process spun off into their own autonomous entities this year.
Gnosis is always trying to solve different things that they saw in the industry that needed improvement. One of them being the MEV sandwiching on DEXs. Hence, Cal Protocol essentially is using the same methods that a central exchange would use, but in a decentralized fashion. You have what's called a coincidence of wants. Say I want to make a trade and I say, hey, T-Wells, I'm looking to buy one Ethereum. Then I find T-Wells out in the ether that wants to sell one Ethereum. And that's what essentially Cal Protocol does. It tries to find these two people. It does not use the liquidity pools like a DEX does. That prevents the MEV attacks. And then Safe, of course, one of the most famous applications out there, like most of the time when you say you're from Gnosis, they're like, oh yeah, I know Gnosis. I know Gnosis Safe. We use that. And it's a self-custody application. As much as we want to cheer it on, which, we don't. As soon as the collapse of FTX, we saw almost $800 million worth of tokens flow into safes. It's not a great thing because, so many people lost money on it, but, people are starting to realize, hey, like why we should have been using this in the first place. So, two super important protocols, now their own DAOs, they're shaping and paving their own future.
Gnosis Safe is one of those things where I feel like there's also this specialized skill set that some people have where you can really execute all sorts of complex stuff from the safe, right? It's not just a safe, right? You can actually do DeFi with it, which is super cool.
It's like an operating system on its own. It's got a lot of potential behind it.
We're going to touch on innovation in this last section, and we're going to do this by talking about some of the most important GIPs that have passed in 2022, and we'll, of course, fold into that discussion about Gnosis builders and what they're doing to promote innovation around Gnosis Chain. So we're going to start off here going chronological order. We're going to start with GIP 27, and this was a proposal to continue the funding and support for Gnosis Guild. If you're not familiar with Gnosis Guild, definitely check them out on Twitter. They're always posting great content, and they've shipped a number of awesome things this year. Gnosis Guild has focused on DAO tooling, and I believe in 2021, late 2021, they had launched the Zodiac. And so the Zodiac is a modular DAO tooling solution, and they're continuing to spin out different modules. And this year, including most recently, Gnosis Guild shipped a new module, I believe, known as the Governor. And so each of these modules enables you to do different things with your on-chain organization. So rather than having everything under one roof, the Zodiac sort of pick and choose the pieces that you need to help you down the path of progressive decentralization. Also this year, the Gnosis Guild shipped the first DAO wiki. So the Zodiac wiki, as you can see, there's the four main categories of patterns, libraries, stories, and documentation. And the other piece was taboola.gg, publishing tool. So Gnosis Guild, a very active, I guess, a sub-DAO essentially of Gnosis DAO, and they secured this funding in early April of this year and will continue building into the future.
You hit the nail on the head there. But the one thing I do want to mention is you can have everything under one roof, but not under chain. So the cool thing about Governor is you can actually have multiple chains that operate your DAO. So you can do, say, you can create an on-chain vote on Gnosis and then execute something on Ethereum, which is super, super cool for interoperability.
Early May of this last year, GIP 35. I believe, Dash, correct me if I'm wrong, but the discussion around tokenomics or a similar discussion really kicked off around this time last year. It seemed to sort of move to this critical point again at the end of May. GIP 35 passing with a total target of 3 million GNO, I believe down from 10 million, or what was the previous number here? Maybe you can help us understand around the mechanics around the token burn.
It was 10 million at the start, and the DAO voted essentially to remove 7 million of the 10 million, bringing down the total supply to 3 million GNO tokens. Now, because of the token and how it's vested, the DAO didn't have the ability to burn it all right away. So as it unlocks, the DAO puts in a vote to essentially burn those tokens into the burn address. Fairly straightforward. This makes the DAO a lot more decentralized because those 3 million GNO tokens are mostly in circulation.
Let's go ahead and move forward then to GIP 37. This is to highlight the Aragon partnership with Gnosis DAO. So I know, Dash, you had some insights here that you wanted to share.
As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to be credibly neutral as a chain. And being incredibly neutral also requires you to be diverse in clients. Currently, we have Nethermind, which is the only client that you can run. And then fairly soon here, we're going to have Aragon. Aragon is essentially what's called Turbo Geth on Ethereum. And it's essentially a modular and optimized version of Geth. It has a modular design. It helps it use less disk space. It's got faster database, write operations, and so on. These improvements, they allow to have higher block gas limits without compromising decentralization. And Gnosis essentially partnered with Aragon, and Gnosis gave them a grant of 2 million DAI up front, 4,000 GNO invested over 3 years in exchange for having Aragon be a client architecture for Gnosis. And hopefully we're going to see it live very soon.
Sweet, man. Yeah, I mean, the number of awesome technical proposals that went through this year, this is complex stuff that they're building here, and I think bodes well for 2023 to see a number of these projects really come to the fore with the community here. We move on to GIP 38. This is the proposal that passed to support ecosystem growth and what has become builders. I have actually two slides on this, one that shows the governance decision here. Obviously, you had over 95% in favor. And this passed at the beginning of May. So first and foremost, head over to Gnosis Builders, add Gnosis Builders on Twitter. We have some snips here that are all hyperlinked. The first is to the XDAI faucet. Another is validategnosis.com, which is intended to help people get started with the validation process with a simple how-to guide. We have gnosisPools.info, where validators can track their performance in real time. There are a couple workshops Gnosis Builders have put out. The first one here linked up is how to deploy a smart contract on Gnosis Chain. I think workshop number 2 is how to deploy a DAO. They do have their own YouTube channel, I believe, at the moment. And then the final snip on this slide, at least, was Gnosis Metrics, which is an analytics dashboard for the Gnosis Chain ecosystem. Dash, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else here, but definitely an important aspect to keep in mind and keep tabs on here going into 2023. I think the Gnosis Builder the coming year.
The builders have been tying up all the loose ends around the chain. And there's also one other thing that wasn't included in this slide is buyxi.com, which is essentially an easy way to on-ramp on Gnosis chains. It's essentially an aggregator for fiat on-ramps as well as bridging from other chains. Yeah, super simple tools. They're trying to make everything flow. The builders have been doing great work for Gnosis.
Awesome. Well, moving right along here in chronological order, we're going to go to GIP 47. And this was passed the beginning of the following month of June of this last year. This was a grant proposal to form a long-term partnership with Nethermind. Dash, you can speak a little more to this in detail. We had a chance to sit down with Nethermind on the DAOcast earlier this year. Unfortunately, we had some sound issues on Twitter Spaces, but their Sedge tool is something we mentioned earlier, SEDGE, right? Sedge, which is a great way to get started, get your feet wet in the validator scene. And so I don't know if you want to speak some more to that, but Nethermind obviously contributed an important tool to building decentralization and Gnosis Chain.
For Nethermind, they're one of the genius teams behind the merge. They were the main player in getting all these things kind of lined up, getting everything working, making sure everything is smooth, and now they're kind of optimizing it to make it easy with the tooling that they've built.
We do have this Twitter snip from some Superfizz up here, one of the most vocal advocates for home validation and endorsing the Sedge tool. So definitely check it out there. Moving on to the following improvement plan or proposal, GIP 48. Again, this was passed more or less synchronously with Nethermind. It is to implement the praise reward system around the Gnosis Chain Validator program. We mentioned this in this particular slide. There's a few more coming here, but on this slide here, if you get your hands on the link, and you also see we've embedded two of the highlight videos from the DAOcast that we had with Christopher earlier in the year, where he just gives a really quick overview of what the praise system is and how it works within the GC Validator community, as well as a little more details on how praise numbers are actually calculated.
Praise is awesome. Make sure you check it out. Go onto the validator channel, ask to be a validator or get the validator role, and then you can join the program and start contributing and obviously earning GNO.
Encourage people to check it out there. This is something that's created by a Common Stack, just as a general tool that people can use in their Discord to incentivize certain activities. So really cool that it's all integration. All right, next up is GIP 61. This is Bootnode here, passed a few months later in August.
The Bootnode team was just like a big team of devs that helped pretty much throughout the whole transition to Gnosis Chain. There's a lot of things that were missing or things kind of needed attention to, and essentially Bootnode deployed all these devs to take care of whatever need they care. One of the main things was the bridging. There was a lot of issues when it comes to, and these guys had everything perfectly and solved all the problems that we had. Hopefully we can see them again in the coming year, but their 6-month contract is up, hoping to work and see them again around Gnosis Chain.
Well, I want to be cognizant of time here, continue to move along. GIP 49, this is a big one. It was passed earlier in the year, right? This last June, the intention, I think more of a signaling proposal was passed, I believe. And then there's a recent announcement that the strategic alliance between Gnosis DAO and MakerDAO has gone live. There's a number of really important parts of this partnership that have really important implications, I think. Yeah, Dash, I'll let you kick it off if you'd like to here, but this is definitely something that's got me really, really bullish for Gnosis DAO and for the chain ecosystem.
This actually passed, earlier in the year, but it didn't pass on the maker side till like very recently. The people leading it was actually Carpet Key, our treasury management team. They did a lot of work to get this thing happening. And essentially now you can lock up GNO and you can mint DAI. It was those things where you'd say like, you are using X DAI for or DAI for your chain. Like it's kind of obvious like this should happen. But, it took so long and Carpet Key worked so hard to make this happen. And they finally figured it out. MakerDAO passed the proposal on their end. Now you have a GNO vault, and you can actually go in there, you can stake GNO, and now you can mint DAI, which is very, very cool.
It seems as though this obviously moves the projects much more close together. It also seems to extend the potential for, a stable way for the Gnosis Chain ecosystem development, which is pretty awesome.
This could not have been done without Carpet Key. Like Carpet Key put in so much work to make this happen. And you can see like all the different things that kind of had to happen in order for this to go through. Carpet Key led the way, and they did an amazing job. Hats off to them.
So we have the very last GIP we're going to discuss today here. A super important one, not only for this year, but also looking forward to the future here. This would be GIP 57, and this was passed mid-July of this last year, and this was to support research, the building of the ZK Snark-enabled light client bridge by Succinct Labs. We had a chance to sit down with Uma from Succinct Labs earlier this year as well in one of our early DAOcasts, and so we've embedded a highlight of that episode on the slide here, just where she covers the basics on how Succinct Labs zero-knowledge tech works, as well as a link to their announcement of Succinct Labs when the Proof of Consensus Bridge demo went live. What's your thoughts on this one, Dash?
It all falls into play with being a credibly neutral chain. You can't really be credibly neutral when you have a multi-sig bridge, which is essentially what everyone kind of uses. As soon as this is a debate and we have this technology working on our chain, we're essentially going to be a trustless chain. Like, you don't need to rely on the multi-sig to pass on funds, which is super cool. And kind of lines for 2023, that the next slide coming up. That's one thing that people should be looking forward to, right? When you're looking at all these hacks, you had the Ronin bridge, just off the top of my head of what I can remember being like one of the biggest ones, like 600 million that was lost. I would say that it should definitely be a priority for every single chain. We don't want to ever run into that issue, hence why this is such an important GIP and such an important piece of technology that needs to be implemented right away to make sure that the chains that we are building are super decentralized and trustless.
But we'll wrap it with that for today, folks. It's a little after the top of the hour. So that's all I got for today and this year. I hope that was a good overview for you. Learned something. And we have 2 more episodes left of the DAOcast we'll be doing next month. So really appreciate everybody for joining us today. Thank you very much, Dash, for co-hosting. And an excellent weekend and a happy New Year.
Thank you very much, T. Wells, and happy New Year. Wish you guys all the best 2020, and we have an awesome year coming up ahead. And so make sure you stay tuned, and we'll chat to you guys soon. See y'all.